Impossible. I can't believe I'm going to be the mother of a handicapped person. On a holiday morning, I was enjoying a leisurely breakfast with my husband. Suddenly my sister brought her daughter, and for some reason she was unfaithful and extremely furious. No, I don't understand. What all of a sudden in the morning? Sis, raising a handicapped person takes a lot of patience. I'm at my wit's end. The sister's daughter stood quietly, crying at her mother's outburst. I will give this one to you who can't have children. Aren't you and a handicapped person who can't have children a perfect match? Don't say that. I immediately refuted her, but my sister left as if to run away. My niece was 7 years old, I believe. She probably couldn't even comprehend what was going on right now. Are you okay? Yay! Now I'm free. What? Susanna Burton, pseudonym, 30-something story. My name is Susanna Burton and I am in my 30s. I have been married for 5 years to my husband, Aaron, whom I met at work, but we have yet to have children. We both love children, and ever since we were dating, we always talked about how we wanted to have children when we got married someday. But reality is cruel. We were not able to have children as we had hoped. After talking with Aaron, we decided that we just couldn't give up on having children of our own and decided to start fertility treatments. We hoped to have just one child, no matter how much it would cost. So we went to the clinic together. However, the doctor told us that our chances of having a child were extremely low. But on the contrary, we were determined. We had done all we could do. All I want is to be with you. Let's enjoy life together. He also encouraged me by saying so. Even if we were not blessed with children in the future, we could enjoy our life together as a couple. One day, when I returned to my parents' house, my sister Caroline had also returned at the same time. She had been popular since she was a student because of her pretty looks and her good sense of humor, and now she was married and had a husband named Seth. I hadn't seen her in a while, and she was dressed in high brands. She proudly told me that Seth has taken over his parents' company and is the president. By the way, she makes fun of the fact that my husband is an ordinary company employee, and she also demeans me. My husband is now the president of the company? Well, he was always an elite. Compared to that, yours. Your husband is amazing, isn't he? But Aaron also works very hard and is very kind to me. You've always been like that, and that's why you can't do anything. I was always bothered inside, while I was appropriately malleable. It was a good thing I didn't talk back to her. By the way, I heard that you are a defective product who can't even have children. You're a useless woman, aren't you? She said mockingly while laughing at me. Caroline has always disliked me anyway. She always tries to outdo me and mount me, which frankly tires me out. She doesn't say such terrible things to me in front of my parents either. She does whatever she wants when her parents are not around. I was deeply offended by her ridicule of my infertility and left my parents' house. Why should I be talked about like that? How much did she think I had suffered because I could not have children? After that, she often pointed out to me how difficult it was for me to have children. When she meets with me, she brags about having a child herself. Even though I have always thought I understood her bad character, I could not tolerate her ridicule of my sensitive issues. She makes fun of me every time I see her like this, and her attitude gets worse and worse. Then we have no choice but to distance ourselves from her. I began to be careful not to see her as much as possible. Then one day on a holiday, many months later, the intercom suddenly rang. Suddenly, the intercom rang. My husband was off today, and he was out shopping. I was alone, doing the housework. When Aaron comes home, maybe we can go out somewhere together. I was washing dishes while thinking about that. I wondered what in the world was going on in the morning, and when I checked, to my surprise, it was Caroline. It's been a while since I've been away from here. I haven't seen her for a long time. And yet, it was her coming to me. Her face on the intercom screen was clearly unhappy, and she was standing there in front of the front door. I wonder what she wants, even though I don't want to see her. I reluctantly open the front door. She is standing in front of me with a sullen expression on her face. It's been a long time. Oh, it's so unusual to see you here with Natalie. We don't want this handicapped person in our house. Her high-pitched voice rings out. I wonder what she is going to say as soon as she arrives, forcing Natalie, who is standing beside her, toward me. Natalie is her daughter. She is 7 years old, I think. Natalie almost fell over when she was suddenly pushed toward me. What do you mean? You just barged in all of a sudden? I stare at Caroline, who is confused and pushes the child away. She takes one look at Natalie, who is sobbing in my arms, and sighs. She is so annoying. A handicapped person who can't even speak properly doesn't deserve to be in our house. How can you use such a violent word as handicapped to your own daughter? I was at a loss for words. What do you mean she can't speak? It means exactly what it means. It's a pain in the ass. Caroline sighs heavily. You know, being a parent of a handicapped person is very, very hard. I can't do it anymore. You can't have children, so I'm going to give you one. What? You can't have children and a handicapped person is a perfect match. Get along with each other. After saying what she wanted to say as much as she wanted, she got into her car and drove away without making eye contact with her daughter. I was so stunned by what had happened that all I could do was hug Natalie. I came to my senses and looked around. I heard my sister's shrill voice echoing throughout the morning. The neighbors might come to see what was going on. I hurriedly took Natalie by the hand and led her into the house. I lock the front door and turn around. Just as I am about to comfort Natalie. Yay! Now I'm free. Natalie, having entered the house and convinced that her mother has returned, exclaims with joy. I had no idea what was going on and decided to listen to her story in the living room. It seems that Natalie has been educated very strictly to be an ideal child. She went to different classes every day and sometimes had more than one class in a day. No matter how hard she tried, she never received praise or recognition. If she failed to do as well as she wanted, she was beaten and yelled at. When she asked for help, her father was always at work, and her paternal grandparents did not pay attention to their female grandchild. Then a younger brother was born, and Natalie lost all positive attention to him. She no longer felt any affection for him, and was treated as if he was an obstacle. She was so afraid of being scolded that she finally stopped speaking in front of her mother, who mistakenly thought she had lost her ability to speak and brought her to me in a rage. When I made mistakes, they would scold me and yell at me. They wouldn't even let me eat. Natalie tells her story with a downcast look on her face. Upon closer inspection, She is emaciated and has scars on her arms and legs. It is too dangerous to send her back to her sister's house now that I have heard such a story. I let her eat her dinner for the time being. Natalie is engrossed in eating her meal. Perhaps this is the first satisfying meal she has had in a long time. How could she not give her growing child enough to eat? I think to myself as I watch her. I am the only one she can rely on right now. I was ready. Aaron returns a little later and is surprised to see Natalie at home. I immediately told him what had happened. I then told him that I wanted to take Natalie in. He too was displeased with my sister and her husband's inability to take care of their own child. He agreed to let Natalie be our child. We made an appointment later that day to meet with my sister and her husband and decided to officially adopt Natalie. Seth, too, seemed to be in the mood that as long as he had a good son, he was fine with Natalie. Seth was also in no way concerned about Natalie. Seth's parents also said that they would be better off without a girl. The adoption process was completed in no time at all. We were relieved and determined to make Natalie happy. From now on, we wanted Natalie to live a life of freedom. We would give her all the love we could, as if she were a real child. We would encourage and support her in whatever she wanted to do. After that, Natalie grew up with a carefree spirit. A few years later, she went to law school at a well-known university. We celebrated the fruit of her diligent efforts as if it were our own. One Sunday, while we were relaxing as a family, my sister and her husband suddenly barged into my house. Without even saying hello to us, they clamored for Natalie's return. I thought back to that time. The sister and her husband came to my house without permission and abandoned my little Natalie as if she were an object. They must have heard somewhere that Natalie had gone to a prestigious university, even though they had never heard from her before. I can't believe they would say that now. Apparently, Natalie's younger brother, who they thought was brilliant, had dropped out of high school. Perhaps they was strictly doing the same kind of intrusive education that they used to do to Natalie in the past. If they were tied down so tightly, any child would lose motivation for everything, not just studying. I had originally heard that Natalie's brother was a recluse and had refused to go to school in middle school. We don't want that socially inept child in our house. Natalie, come home. Upon learning that Natalie had been admitted to a difficult university, my sister and her husband came to pick her up. How could they come to pick up their daughter, whom they once called handicapped and discarded, for their own convenience? Children are not their parents' property or toys. I was deeply offended by their unmanageable behavior. Since that moment when we decided to raise Natalie as our own child, we had given her our wholehearted love. Aaron, who had raised her as his own daughter, also covered Natalie's back and refused to let her go. The two of them continued to fuss at the door that they were Natalie's parents. They were no longer getting anywhere, and just when I thought they were. My parents are Aaron and Susanna. You are not my parents. Natalie stared at my sister and her husband with a serious look in her eyes. When she clearly refused, the sister and her husband left, leaving her with the discarded words that they would take legal action. Later that day, the sister and her husband hired a lawyer to try to pretend that Natalie's adoption had never happened. However, at that time we had followed the official procedure and adopted Natalie. Therefore, they could not dissolve the adoption. In addition, Natalie, who was 7 years old at the time, still bore the scars of violence that we called discipline, and she was much thinner than the norm. I have a medical certificate in my possession that states that she was probably abused. I showed the medical certificate to my sister and her husband, who were going to court, and asked them if they were still going to court. Seth, who had taken over his parents' company and was now the president, declined to go to trial for fear of bad publicity. They are the kind of couple who would even abandon their own child out of concern for the world. There was no way they could go to court with the evidence of their abuse in front of them. But somewhere along the way, a rumor began to circulate that Natalie, Seth's eldest daughter, had been adopted, as if she had been abused and abandoned. The rumor spread quickly, and the stock price of Seth's company dropped dramatically. Soon after, Seth was removed from his position as president of the company in order to take responsibility for his actions. My sister and her husband then disappeared. Natalie's younger brother, who was left alone, was taken in by Seth's relatives, passed his tests, and attended college. Natalie successfully graduated from college and got a job at the company she wanted. She married a man she met at work. We were sad to see her go, but wished her a long and happy life as she left our home with her husband and wife. What did you think of this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video. They took all of your father's insurance money and kicked me out of my house. Can I stay with you just tonight? I was shocked that my mother would be treated like that by the son and his wife who lived with her. She looked even worse than before, and although it was winter, she was incredibly thin and wearing tattered clothes. I was willing to accept her, of course. But my husband, who was with me.
I don't want you to do that. Let me drive you to your house.
Said to her. I was astonished. I had no idea that my husband was such a cold person. But actually, he had an idea. I am Kate, 30 years old. My husband's name is Samuel. Samuel and I met at an English conversation class we both attended. We happened to be paired up a lot, and I liked him because he seemed kind and gentle, and I approached him. Our personalities are complete opposites. I like to talk a lot, but he is quiet and not very talkative. I'm the headstrong type and act quickly when I have an idea, while he is the cautious type. At first glance, we may not seem to fit together, but we are surprisingly compatible and comfortable with each other. Samuel said,
I've always been shy since I was little, and it was hard for me to make friends, so when I studied all the time, I became even more of a poor communicator.
It is true that he is very educated. I wondered why he had never married before, but his shyness made it difficult for him to meet good people. After we were married, we remained close and enjoyed each other's company. Every day I would talk about what happened that day, and he would happily listen. However, in the midst of our peaceful days, a problem arose. I have an older brother. His name is Chris. Chris has always been superior and mean to me, and even though we are brothers, I hated him. We had very little contact as adults, until 2 years ago when I got word that he was getting married. His wife, Molly, was also kind of a mean-spirited person and I just could not like them both. Samuel knew I had a hard time with him, so we kept our relationship to a minimum with my brother and his wife. For the 2 years after Chris got married, we had almost no contact with each other. But then he contacted me.
We're moving in with our dads. You don't have a problem with that, do you?
I was surprised at the suddenness of his words. I asked him why he was moving in with them.
That's obvious. Because I need someone to take care of my mom and dad in their old age.
he said. The Chris and Molly I knew didn't seem like the type to say such a thing. But as long as they were like that, I had no right to stop them. I called my mother and asked her about it. Chris told me that it's probably getting too old for us. She didn't seem particularly anxious about it, so I was relieved. However, a few months after my brother and his wife moved in with my parents, our father suddenly fell ill. To my surprise, he was told that he had very little time left to live. When I heard this diagnosis, my mind went blank. My father was one of the most important people in my life. I had never thought about his illness. It was a shock to me, but it must have been a shock to my mother as well. I decided to do all I could to support my parents. After that, Samuel and I found time to visit my father. It was hard for me to see my father suffering from his illness. But when he saw my pained face, he said to me,
"You are cheerful and always smiling, aren't you?"
I thought that I should do my best, too. However, there were two things that bothered me when I went to visit my father. One was that my brother and his wife did not seem to have come to visit him at all. The other was that my mother looked very thin. I thought that my mother's thinness was due to the fact that my father had become ill, just as I had, but then, perhaps it was a daughter's intuition, but I had a feeling that this was not the case. On the day I happened to be visiting my mother, I invited her to a cafe and listened to what she had to say. "Mom, you look kind of out of shape. Are you all right? Is it just my imagination, or is it not just because you are worried about my father?" When I asked her that, she looked at me with a startled expression on her face. Then she lowered her eyes. "It's not a big deal. Ever since your father was hospitalized, things haven't been going well with Chris. But you don't have to worry so much." She then trailed off. After that, no matter what I tried to get out of her, she wouldn't answer me any more about it. I couldn't stand still. The next day, I visited my parents' house shortly before my brother and his wife returned home. Surprised and trying to persuade my mother to stop, I decided to hide in a closet in the living room to check on the house. Then I would see a surprise. As soon as my brother came home.
"I'm hungry. Mom, I want some food,"
he asks. I'm just getting ready. Molly, who comes home at the same time and sighs. I told you to have the food ready when we get home, didn't I? You've been a housewife for so many years. You can't even do that? Besides, my favorite clothes were a little faded. It cost a lot of money, so what are you going to do about it? Molly blamed my mother one after another. After that, I could see that my brother and his wife were treating my mother as if she were a slave. I was getting angry at what my brother and his wife were saying and doing, but somehow I managed to suppress my emotions. I knew that it would be unwise for me to run out of the house at this point. After that, I watched my brother and his wife bully my mother and beg for money, trembling with anger. Then, after making sure that my brother and his wife had gone to their room, I sneaked out of the house. I immediately reported this to Samuel. As I reported it, I cried out of frustration and sadness. I said to Samuel, "Hey Samuel, do something about it. You go to my parents' house and tell Chris and the others to get tough." I told him, but he was calm.
"That's not a very nice way to go."
He said that and shut up without saying anything more. I couldn't believe that he didn't say anything to me until this moment, no matter how quiet he said he was. I couldn't suppress my mortified feeling. On top of that, My mother said to me, "Listen, I want you to keep what you saw yesterday in your mind for a while. Your father is sick and I just want to think about that right now. I'll be fine, so you don't have to do anything anyway." I could not do anything when my mother said that to me. But then, my father passed away without any treatment. Even though I had prepared myself, I could not accept the fact that my father had passed away. I was overcome with a grief that crushed my heart, and I could not stop crying. I am sure my mother felt the same way. Then, one night some time later, I felt the loss of my father. I was still unable to regain my strength due to the loss of my father. My mother suddenly came to our house late at night. She was even more gaunt than I had seen her before, and though it was winter, she was incredibly thin and wearing tattered clothes. She was also carrying a single, slightly smaller tote bag. She shivered and forced herself to paste a smile on her face. "Chris and his wife took all of your father's insurance money. I've been kicked out of my house too. Can I stay at your house just tonight?" she said in a small voice. I was speechless at the unbelievable situation. At that moment, Samuel, who greeted my mother at the door with me, said,
"I don't want you to do that. I will drive you to your house."
Samuel's words stunned me. Oh my God, Samuel. What were you thinking? He was unfazed by my words.
"It's all right."
And walked my mother to the car. I hurriedly followed him and got in the car with him, not understanding what was going on. We then arrived at my parents' house with everyone in the car silent. I am usually a talkative person, but at this moment I was so confused that I did not know where to start. However, I could see that Samuel was sending a message to someone. And just like that, we arrived at my parents' house. My brother and his wife came out to the front door and looked at us with a disgusted look on their faces as if they were looking at insects. Chris on top of that.
"You brought extra people again."
Chris shouted at us. As expected, I was about to shout back at him when he said,
"Good evening."
I heard an unfamiliar voice. I looked up to see a strange man standing behind me and stepping in front of us. "What? Who?" I muttered again, unable to hide my confusion. The man silently gave me his business card and handed one to my brother and sister-in-law.
"I'm Finn, a lawyer. Pleased to meet you."
He introduced himself. Even my brother and his wife, who are usually arrogant and superior to me, looked at me wide-eyed as if they couldn't believe their ears at what the man said. Then Chris said,
"Lawyer? What the hell do lawyers want?"
And he crowded into Finn's arms.
"Samuel offered me a job. He and I have been friends since we were students."
Samuel told my mother.
"Do you have what I was asking you to do?"
he asked. My mother then pulled out a number of voice recorders from a bag she was carrying. Then Finn said,
"In these voice recorders, there is evidence of your usual moral harassment. Your mother has been going to a mental health clinic because of the stress she has been under. You will have to pay her a very generous amount of alimony."
He told them in an indifferent manner. My brother and his wife heard this and said,
"Alimony? And when did you say you recorded it?"
Their faces contorted in surprise as they stared at Finn and us with astonished eyes. "Wait, what do you mean?" I couldn't resist asking Samuel. According to Samuel's story, he had heard about my mother from me and had been making moves under the radar to see what he could do. He is a well-educated man with friends who are doctors, lawyers, and bureaucrats, and this time he contacted his friend Finn, a lawyer. Samuel told my mother that he would keep it a secret from me for now and proceeded with various preparations. One of them was the recording of this moronic remark. Finn told me that after hearing the two of them say the usual SOSO things, he told me that he could get enough alimony. Then Finn says to my brother and sister-in-law again. He thought that this might be the case, and Finn instructed our mother to make such a procedure for our mother at a time shortly before the insurance money came in. Chris muttered, and my brother and sister-in-law both looked stunned. Finn followed up on their pale faces.
By the way, this house, if you don't leave in about a week, we'll have to call the police.
My brother and his wife looked even more puzzled. Molly said to them, "Are you crazy? It's our house. Why do we have to leave?" Then Finn said,
"Your mother has already sold this house."
He told them once and for all. The brother and his wife opened their mouths with a pout. Finn and Samuel continued to explain to my brother and his wife. My mother had tolerated living with my father while he was alive, but now that he was gone, she felt that she could no longer live with him and his wife. My mother had been thinking of moving out and living on her own since before they kicked her out of the house, because my brother and his wife would never leave without a fight. When Samuel and Finn heard about this, they suggested that she should sell my parents' house then. Since my parents' house was in my mother's name, the process was quick and easy. This meant that my brother and his wife would not only not get my father's insurance money, but they would also lose their house.
Well, that's the way it is then. In the meantime, why don't you go and get some more necessary belongings? That's why we brought you home once we did.
Samuel informed my mother. Most of my things are gone now, as they were sold or thrown away by Chris and his wife, but I'm glad I left behind some of my mementos with my husband, she said, and went to get ready to slam the door. Chris was like,
"Hey, that's crazy. We live in this house too and you force us out."
And Molly yelled, "That's right. We're suing you guys." Molly shouted.
"Sue us."
He asked back, then huffed and snickered. Then
Why don't you hire a lawyer too? I'll fight. Well, in this situation, I'm not going to lose.
He gave his brother and sister-in-law a surprisingly cold smile. My brother and his wife seemed overwhelmed by the situation and fell silent. We went home with my mother, who had finished packing up her belongings. We later learned that my brother and his wife had failed in the stock market and were in debt. So they decided to use the money from our father's insurance policy to pay off their debts. The reason they originally decided to move in together was to get the insurance money from one of them in the future, and also because Molly didn't want to do the housework, so they decided to have our mother do it for them. Then our father passed away earlier than they expected, so they thought it would be a good thing to take the insurance money. What a selfish story. They were kicked out of their house, had debts, and were even being charged alimony. They are now in a state of homelessness, working day jobs and sleeping in motels on days when they have money. I told Samuel about a time when I visited my parents' home with my mother.
You asked me to talk you out of it, but I'm not a good talker, so I wasn't sure. But I have a few friends, and I just remembered my friend Finn from college, and I asked him, and he was willing to do it. I thought that if I told you in advance, you might take some unnecessary action, so I decided to move in secret.
He laughed. I was a little miffed, but he was right. Come to think of it, my mother was preparing to live on her own, but Samuel and I encouraged her to come to our house, and now she lives with us. My mother can now afford quite well with her pension, the insurance money she got back, and the money from selling the house. She now spends her days happily attending flamenco, piano, and other lessons. I am sure that my late father would have been happy to see my mother's lively life from heaven. What did you think of this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.